everyday Victorian products. We're starting upstairs in the bedroom because that's where the wallpaper is. There are 4 children in this room and they have been picking at the wall. It comes away in pieces down low where a small hand can reach it. They play with the bits and they lick the color off. Over a few weeks in the spring of 1862, 3 of them die. This is a real house on Tomlin's Terrace in Limehouse in the East End of London. Their father lays bricks for a living and his name is Richard Turner. The first doctor says diphtheria, and honestly, that's a fair guess, because diphtheria is everywhere and it kills children. Then a doctor called Thomas Orton is brought in to see the 4th child, who is 3 years old and very ill, and he can't save her either, but he notices something on the way in. Nobody else on this street has caught it, not the neighbors, not anybody. Whatever this is, it stops at the walls of this house. So he looks at the walls. The paper is green. Orton has it tested, and he reports that it contains immense quantities of arsenic. The coroner opens an inquest in the Freemasons, which is the pub on Salmon's Lane. Yes, the inquest isn't a pub. It's the 1860s. He sends the stomach contents of the dead child and Amelia Turner to a Dr. Letheby at the London hospital, and everyone expects him to order the other 3 dug up. And then the inquest hears all of that and returns a verdict of natural causes. Natural causes? I shit you not. Now that paper on the wall is not cheap paper. The green is the good green. A Swedish chemist called Scheele figures it out in 1775. Copper and arsenic ground into a pigment, and it does something no green has ever managed before. It stays green. Your ordinary vegetable greens go brown on a sunny wall. This one doesn't. Green is hard, arsenic fixes it, and everybody who sells paint or paper or cloth or candles or book covers or wax stoppers or artificial flowers now has a green that stays. By the 1860s, Britain is cranking out something like 700 tons of arsenic green a year. On purpose. Look, there's a version of this story that goes further than the evidence does, though, so let me be straight with you about it. The famous version is a gas. An Italian scientist called Gossio shows in the 1890s that mold growing on damp wallpaper paste can turn the arsenic into something you breathe, and that becomes the explanation for every sickly Victorian bedroom in the country. Modern toxicologists have gone back over it, and they don't buy it. The gas is far less poisonous than the story needs it to be, and there just isn't enough of it. So whether Victorian wallpaper actually gassed people in their beds is still argued about. Whether there's arsenic in it? Not argued about at all. And neither is what the Turner children were doing with it. Now, the most famous wallpaper designer in Britain is William Morris. The green leaves, the birds, the trellis, you know his work, even if you don't know that you know it. His father is one of the original investors in a mine in Devon called Devon Great Consols, and that mine switches over to arsenic. It becomes the largest arsenic producer in the world. By 1870, it is supplying half the arsenic on the planet, something like 70,000 tons over its life. William Morris sits on the board of that company for 4 years. He is publicly dismissive of the whole wallpaper scare, and he uses arsenic pigment in his own early designs. That's the one I can't get over, and by now, you're asking the obvious question. So when does Britain ban arsenic in wallpaper? Now, Britain does have an arsenic law, and it's a serious one. The Sale of Arsenic Act of 1851. Every sale goes in a book. The amount, the purpose, the date, the buyer's name and address and trade, signed by both parties. You can't sell to a stranger unless a witness who knows you both is standing right there. You can't sell to anybody underage, and the arsenic has to be mixed with soot or indigo, so nobody can pass it off as flour. Airtight, right? Here's the hole. The act covers arsenic, the powder. It does not cover anything made out of arsenic: wallpaper, fly papers, rat paste, sheep dip, cosmetics. All of it untouched, all of it on open sale. That's like banning knives, but leaving the swords on the shelf, because technically a sword is home decor, so nobody bans the paper. Germany passes a law, Britain never does, and the trade dies anyway, because customers just stop buying it. So manufacturers start printing arsenic-free on the sample books, because by then, that's what sells, the Victorian version of slapping gluten-free on a bottle of water. In 1879, a firm called Jeffrey & Company brings out a whole line of papers sold as arsenic-free and gets a chemist from the Royal Arsenal to certify them. One of the designs is a nursery paper by Walter Crane called, and I am not making this up, The Sleeping Beauty. The bedroom got fixed? Nobody ever got around to the law. Stay upstairs because there's a child in bed up here in a flannelette nightdress. Flannelette is the sensible buy. It's cotton, brushed up to feel like wool, and it costs a fraction of what wool costs. You buy it because the room is cold, and you are not going to let your kid be cold. But first, let's deal with the thing you've already heard. 3,000 women a year burned to death in crinoline fires. The hoop skirt catches the grate, and the whole thing goes up like a torch. Nobody can tell you where it comes from. It always gets pinned on the Lancet, vaguely, the way your buddy pins his facts on a study, and it's never the same claim twice. 3,000 in 1860. 3,000 across a decade. 3,000 somewhere between the late 50s and the late 60s. That wobble is the tell. A real number doesn't move around like that, so let's go get a real one. In 1879, the Registrar General publishes what he publishes every single year, a table of how everybody in England and Wales died. Burns and scalds that year killed just over 2,500 people. Roughly 1,500 of them are male. Roughly 1,150 are female. More men than women. Wait, more men than women? I hear you ask. Weren't the hoop skirts supposed to be doing the killing here? That's the point. That one number on its own finishes the crinoline story, and it gets worse for the story when you look at who those women actually are. The biggest single group, by a long shot, is girls under 5. Most of that female total is children, and the women of crinoline-wearing age, the women you'd picture in a hoop, are a sliver of it. For the whole of England and Wales. For the whole year. Now I'll be fair to the myth. 1879 is late, and crinolines peak about 15 years earlier. But the shape of that table is not a fashion story. It's a small child in a room with an open fire, and the government eventually goes and measures exactly that. In 1899 and 1900, the Home Secretary asks 200 coroners how many children have burned to death, and the answer across those 2 years is, I shit you not, nearly 1,700 inquests. In all but about 250 of them, the fire had no guard on it. In the Commons, they say a good fire guard costs £2 or £3. The cheap one that working families actually buy costs a shilling. Parliament finally gets there in 1908. It becomes an offense to leave a child under 7 in a room with an unguarded fire, but only if the child is killed or badly hurt. Maximum fine, £10. That'll teach them. And then the police and the magistrates turn out to be mostly unwilling to enforce even that. One coroner says out loud that they cannot treat as criminal a parent whose chief crime was being poor. Okay, back to the nightdress. In December of 1912, in the House of Commons, an MP named Joynson Hicks stands up, and he wants to talk about the large and increasing number of children burning to death in flannelette. And the man has tables. 89 deaths in the January of 1910 alone, 176 in 3 months, over 1,000 in the year. Then the Home Office reads out the Registrar General's actual figure for 1910, 67 out of 657 deaths from burning clothes of every description in the entire country. So where do the other 900 come from? Not from the Registrar General. The tables were put together by the proprietors of non-flam flannelette, the version that doesn't catch, out of newspaper reports, and the committee never checked them. And when the minister is asked whether he will look into the difference, the answer in Hansard is 2 words. No, sir. We're leaving the house for this one, because this is the thing you buy on the way home. It's a Saturday night in Bradford, England, the tail end of October, 1858. William Hardacre runs a candy stall on the Green Market, and everybody calls him Humbug Billy. Great name. No notes. Billy buys his stock wholesale from a guy named Joseph Neal on Stone Street, and Neal does what everybody in the trade does. He cuts the sugar. Yes, cuts it, exactly like a drug dealer, because sugar is expensive. So part of every batch is a filler, the trade calls daft, and daft is plaster of Paris, ground up white and cheap. This isn't some criminal conspiracy either. It's just ordinary business, and honestly, the customers half know. That night, Neal sends a man out to a druggist named Hodgson at Baildon Bridge, 3 miles away, to pick up 12 pounds of daft. Now Hodgson is sick upstairs. So the boy behind the counter goes up to the attic on his own to fetch it. And this kid is brand new, he's had no training of any kind, and his name is William Goddard. There are 2 casks up there. The one he scoops 12 pounds out of? Oh, it's labeled. On the bottom, it's arsenic. Back at Stone Street, Neil's experienced candy maker mixes all 12 pounds into about 40 pounds of peppermint humbugs, basically hard peppermint candies. And during the boiling, he notices the batch looks wrong. Nobody stops. Hardacre notices they look wrong too, so he knocks the price down and he sells about 5 pounds of them that Saturday night. By the next morning, 2 boys, ages 9 and 14, are dead. Hardacre himself is very ill because the man had been eating his own stock. Never get high on your own supply, Billy. About 20 people die, and more than 200 are seriously ill. When a Bradford chemist named Remington gets the candy under a bench, he finds 2 to 4 times a fatal adult dose in a single humbug. 1 candy. And they're being sold to children by weight. So Hodgson, Neil, and Goddard are all committed for trial for manslaughter. And I shit you not one of them is convicted of anything. At York, the case against 2 of them is thrown out, and the druggist, Hodgson, is acquitted. Wait, how does nobody go down for this? I hear you ask. Because the judge decides nobody was criminally negligent. A terrible accident, start to finish, and nobody's fault. And Bradford isn't a freak. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Now, in the early 1850s, a doctor named Arthur Hill Hassall goes through Britain's food with a microscope for the Lancet, the medical journal. And the genuinely radical thing he does is print the shopkeepers' names and addresses. Victorian doxing. On candy, chrome yellow in nearly 60 of them, red lead in a dozen, mercury in half a dozen, and in 9 of them, copper arsenite, which is Scheele's green, the same pigment that was on that bedroom wall 10 minutes ago. Yeah, this episode has a recurring villain. Oh, and the plaster of Paris. You've probably heard that the Victorians put plaster and chalk and bone dust in their bread. Hassall tested for it in 40-odd flour samples and every loaf he could buy, and he found none of it. That story isn't true. It's in the candy. He finds it in 13 of them, at up to 43% by weight. And the worst one, almost half the candy, by weight, is plaster. Now Bradford does eventually produce a law. It takes 2 years, and the 1860 Act is, and I'm being generous here, theater. Appointing an analyst is optional, and you have to prove the seller knew. Good luck with that. Dr. Letheby, the first public analyst in the City of London, gets 4 samples in his first 3 months. All 4 are adulterated. 4 samples, really throwing the full weight of the law at it there. The law that actually bites doesn't show up until 1875, 17 years after Humbug Billy. All right, so back inside the house and down to the kitchen. There's a bottle on the shelf. This is Manchester, smack in the middle of the century. Now that bottle might be Godfrey's cordial, might be Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, or Dalby's carminative, or Atkinson's Royal Infant's preservative, or the one that's just straight up named Street's Infant's Quietness. No, I'm not making that name up. There are at least 10 brands like this being aimed squarely at babies. They're all opium. Wait, opium? I hear you ask. For babies? Yep. Godfrey's runs at about 1.25 grains of opium to the ounce, and it's on open sale to anybody who walks in. No prescription, no age limit. Nobody asks. Laudanum goes for a penny for 20 or 25 drops, which is roughly what you'd pay for a pint of beer. So, beer money. And people are buying it by the gallon, literally. One druggist in Manchester moves half a gallon of Godfrey's cordial every single week, plus 5 or 6 gallons of a cheaper local knockoff the trade just calls quietness. And 5 out of every 6 working families here, I shit you not, are reckoned to be using the stuff habitually. That's the number that stops you, because nobody buying it thinks they're drugging their kid. They think they're buying sleep for a teething baby, and it comes over a chemist's counter in a bottle with a label on it, all nice and official. And look at it from their side. You're at work, or you're taking in work, and a baby that screams all day is a baby that costs you the job. Now here's where it gets dark. Across the 1860s, the Registrar General records more than 200 deaths from narcotics in children under 1 year old. And the only reason that number exists at all is that he's had to invent a brand new category for it. It's gotten frequent enough to need one. In 1854, a physician named Thomas Bull does the math. 3/4 of all the opium deaths in England are children under 5. There's a 9-month-old who overdoses on 4 drops of laudanum, given over 9 hours. 4 drops. But the overdoses aren't even the main event, and the Victorians figure that out themselves. A Dr. Greenhow, investigating for the Privy Council in the early 1860s, reports that children kept in a state of continued narcotism are disinclined for food, his words, and are therefore badly nourished. These kids aren't mostly dying of the drug. They're mostly starving, slowly, because a drugged baby doesn't wake up hungry. People writing at the time described dosed infants as shrunk up into little old men. In 1871, a Commons Committee on Infant Life sits down and lists what kills babies put out to nurse for money. Improper and insufficient food is first on that list. Opiates are second. Second, on a parliamentary committee's list of what's killing babies. So Parliament finally does something. 1868, opium goes on the poisons schedule. Now it lands in the weaker of the 2 tiers. The chemists fought it. Laudanum, they point out, is a big chunk of their trade. And what does the Act actually require of the bottle? The seller's name and address. That's it. That's what changes. And you can watch it work because the British Medical Association later collects the wrappers. One of them reads, "In conformity with the Sale of Poisons Act, this preparation, containing a minute quantity of laudanum and chloroform, must be labeled poison, but its composition remains unaltered." Translation, new sticker, same syrup. A rival's wrapper reads, "This preparation does not contain any opium, laudanum, or morphine, therefore does not require a poison label." They're bragging. So the label changes. What's inside doesn't. And how does the syrup end? Quietly, and without anybody being told. At some point, somebody at the company just takes the morphine out. No announcement, no apology. The recipe changes, and the bottle keeps right on selling on 60 years of reputation, still promising it contains no poisonous ingredient and may be used with perfect safety, which eventually becomes true. Alright, back up to the nursery, one last time. This is the one that isn't finished. The baby is teething and the baby is screaming, and there is a product for that. There's a small paper packet of teething powder, and you tip it straight into the mouth, about twice a week, for the whole time the teeth are coming through. Steedman's is advertising 50 years of experience by 1909, which puts these on the shelf in the 1860s, right in the middle of everything else in this video, and they're normal. A survey after the war finds that nearly half of all British children aged 1 to 2 have been given teething powders, half the country. Now in 1909, the British Medical Association gets curious. They buy the famous brands, have them analyzed, and publish the results with the brand names attached. Not a leading brand, names. It's all in a chapter called Soothing, Teething, and Cooling Powders for Infants. Steedman's Soothing Powders, Pritchard's Teething and Fever Powders. Depending on which packet you buy, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 of it is calomel. Wait, calomel? I hear you ask, what the heck is calomel? Calomel is a mercury compound, and mercury is 85% of calomel by weight. So the powder you are tipping into the mouth of a child who doesn't even have teeth yet is, I shit you not, 1/4 to 1/3 mercury, depending on the packet. Then read the advertising, because it gets better. Pritchard's promise their powders prevent fits and convulsions and ensure refreshing and natural sleep for the child, and therefore peaceful nights for the parents. And a Steedman's booklet, under a heading that literally says Important Notice, states that Steedman's soothing powders contain no poison or opiate of any description. That's the mercury powder telling you in print that there's no poison in it. And in the very same chapter, there's a competitor. Benning's Children's Cooling Powders, 70% potassium chlorate, 30% powdered licorice. No mercury, no opium, nothing else in it at all. So a harmless teething powder was entirely possible. One firm just did it. Now, did the Victorians know? Partly. And be careful here, because this is where the story usually gets overcooked. They know a lot about acute mercury poisoning. There's a London book from 1840, 3 years into the reign, going after exactly this, people dosing themselves and their families with calomel at home. And it lists what the stuff does: salivation, ulcerated gums, tremors. The medical profession has also quietly given up on teething as a killer. Charles West, the man who founds Great Ormond Street, notes that teething is written on the death certificates of nearly 1 in 20 London children dying under a year, and by 1885, he says that in 70,000 cases, it has worried him once. Neither he nor his successors recommend calomel for teething, so the doctors walk away from it. The habit carries on at home, kept alive by the advertising. What nobody knows is the real thing. From about 1903, children across Europe and Australia start showing up with something that doesn't have a name yet. Hands and feet gone pink and swollen, agonizing sensitivity, hair falling out, refusing food, and around 1 in 10 of them dying. Gets called pink disease. In England and Wales, between 1939 and 1948, it kills getting on for 600 children. The answer lands in The Lancet, May of 1948. Two American researchers, Warkani and Hubbard, measure the mercury in the urine of children with the disease, and they find it in 18 out of 20. And in Zurich, the same year, a man named Fanconi confirms it from completely the other end, because in Switzerland, they don't give calomel for teething at all. They give it as a worm cure, same drug, different excuse, and the same disease waiting at the end of it. So the cause is proven in 1948. Nothing happens for 5 years. And that is the whole point of this video. Then, in 1953, a doctor reports 2 fatal cases to the coroner in Stoke-on-Trent, and the inquests return chronic mercurial poisoning on 2 death certificates. The papers pick it up, and the calomel comes out. One manufacturer changes the recipe, and the year after the inquests, medical officers of health make the rounds of the pharmacies, pulling old stock off the shelves. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. No act of parliament, no ban, no minister. One coroner and some bad press at a point when a single manufacturer is cranking out 30 million powders a year. British deaths from pink disease run at 57 in 1950 and hit 0 in 1962, which means the last children dosed with this stuff are in their 70s right now. They're not history. They're at the bus stop. So, take another look around the room. Now, here's the part I didn't expect when I started reading about this stuff, and honestly, it's the reason this video exists. I figured the story went the way these stories are supposed to go. People use a thing, somebody figures out it's poison, everybody stops using it. That's the shape you're expecting. That is not what happened. In most of these, the danger was known first, sometimes for 40 or 50 years, and the stuff just stayed on the shelves. Wait, they knew? I hear you ask? Yeah, they knew. So it was rarely knowledge that ended them. When a law turned up at all, it turned up late. What usually ended them was fashion moving on, or a cheaper substitute showing up, or an industry deciding the coverage was getting embarrassing, which means the Victorians weren't ignorant. They were informed, and they bought that shit anyway, because it was lovely, and it was right there in the shop, and everybody else had one, and none of these people were reckless. That's the whole thing. These were the careful ones. The folks who read the advertisement, which is basically the Victorian version of checking the reviews, went to the good shop, paid the extra, and walked home feeling pretty pleased with themselves. They were doing what you do. Oh, and it isn't just the powders that aren't finished. There's lead paint sitting under the wallpaper of a few million British houses tonight, including some very nice ones, and it's mostly dangerous when somebody decides to improve the room, because that's what this always is. It's not a scandal, it's not a cover-up, and there's no villain in a top hat twirling his mustache. It's just an ordinary person in a shop buying the good version for a house they were proud of. You'd have bought the wallpaper. Everybody bought the wallpaper.